You're listening to DTFHN for August 16, 2026. I'm your open-sourced against my will host, Jack Hacksman. We are your daily tech feed for hacker news. A website wadded the article, and the article never gets a rebuttal. Today is about what you can take apart, what you can check, and who's holding the key when you can't. Let's crack the case open. 2 screws. That's the entire install. 2 screws and you've bolted a motor onto a bicycle that was never designed to have one. And Asus, the company that makes your laptop, is the one selling it to you. The Oxys is a friction drive, meaning it doesn't touch your chain, your hub, or your bottom bracket. It presses a spinning roller against your rear tire and shoves. That's it. That's the mechanism. It's the same principle as pushing a toy car forward with your thumb, executed with torque sensors and a smartphone app. And the engineering underneath is genuinely lovely. Friction drive is the only conversion topology that's truly universal. No while builds, no cassette compatibility, no frame standard roulette. The system has to read your pedaling intent through nothing but roller feedback and infer when you want help. That's a real control problem, solved reasonably well in a package you can move between bikes in about 90 seconds. Now, let me argue the other side, because the comments did it first, and they did it well. Friction drive was tried. Clive Sinclair. Yes, that's Sinclair, the ZX Spectrum Sinclair. Shipped one in the 90s called the Zeta. It sold okay. It was murdered by battery chemistry, not by physics. And the physics complaints have not aged away. Roughly 20% transmission loss versus a mid-drive, tire wear you'll actually notice, and near total failure the moment the road is wet. A roller pressed against a wet tire is a roller spinning against a wet tire. The friction coefficient collapses and your motor becomes a decoration. One commenter landed the killer. Most commuter bikes have fenders. The exact bikes this is aimed at are the bikes it physically cannot mount to. But the part that should bother you isn't mechanical. It's the app. Motor speed control routed through a phone, through a proprietary stack, on a device that Asus owns the firmware for. 2 screws to install means 2 screws to steal. And no visibility into what's running on that controller. A bicycle is one of the last honestly repairable machines humans own. You can fix any part of it with hand tools and a video. Bolting a closed control system onto it trades that away for convenience. The friction drive isn't the flaw here. The closed loop around it is. Open the firmware, publish the torque protocol, and the tinkerers will fix the rain problem themselves. 2 screws and a locked bootloader. And now we're going the other direction entirely. Pause physics that nobody can patent. Story 2. What survives when you take something apart? Not metaphorically, physically. Keep removing layers until only one remains, and see whether the thing still does what it does. A team just did that to high-temperature superconductivity, bismuth strontium copper oxide. Peel down to a single monolayer. 1 copper oxide plane, the thinnest possible slice of the material class that has confused physicists since 1986, and it still superconducts. The transition temperature drops about 10%, which is remarkable mostly for how small that number is. You removed everything. And the phenomenon shrunk. Follow that principle to its end. If 2 copper oxide planes contain the essential physics and 1 plane still works, then the interesting question stops being what cuprates are made of and becomes what happens when you can finally reach in and change it. Which is exactly what they got. A monolayer is all surface. Every atom is exposed. So they tune the oxygen content with a precision that bulk crystals never allow, and walked the material into regions of the phase diagram nobody had mapped. There, Between insulator and superconductor, sitting at temperatures approaching absolute zero, they found something that refuses to be either one, an anomalous metal, and the scaling exponent at that transition diverges. The math describing the boundary stops converging on a number. That is a real result. Dimensional reduction as a tuning knob and a phase nobody ordered. Now the comments. Someone reads the abstract and says the prose sounds like a product launch, not a nature paper, and starts doubting the whole thing. Another poster links a competing result and asks, dryly, whether the two teams could pool their tacit knowledge, noting that without open peer review, you cannot tell. The suspicion is misplaced. The complaint underneath it is not. Physics decided the quality signal should be 3 anonymous reviewers behind a paywall, and here we are. A reader with genuine interest, unable to check anything, forced to make inferences from writing style. That is what a closed process produces. Doubt with nowhere to go. The materials science here is the opposite. Monolayer exfoliation is a technique anyone with a glove box can learn. The oxygenation protocol is publishable. The tacit knowledge that commenter mentioned is exactly what open methods transfer. Put the review in the open, and this stops being a question about tone. Complete pivot. From materials lab arguing about peer review to a database engine arguing with its own threads. Story 3. Asynchronous I/O in DuckDB. Work. Thread. Work. A commenter asks the question that sounds like a nitpick and isn't. Do the CSV files allow quoted new lines? Because if they do, how do you read from the middle of a file asynchronously without scanning the whole thing first to figure out whether that new line you landed on is a record separator or just a comma inside somebody's address field? That's the whole problem in one sentence. Asynchronous I/O means firing off byte range requests before you know what's in them. You're guessing at boundary. DuckDB beat look. Shipping this fall does it anyway. Pedro Holanda's write-up is 21 minutes of the kind of engineering that deserves to be read slowly. The setup. DuckDB spent most of its life assuming your data sat on a local SSD. Prune early, push filters down, read only what you need. And the data path barely mattered because a local disk answers fast. Then the use case moved. Data lakes, blob storage in S3, compute on EC2 in the same region. Suddenly a worker thread issues a read and just sits there. Blocked, doing nothing while the network takes its time. So they split it. Dedicated async threads keep fetch tasks in flight. The worker threads decode, aggregate, actually compute. When a scan has nothing to chew on yet, the task parks itself and frees the thread to go run some other part of the query. The parking is the elegant bit, not a thread pool sized bigger. A task that knows how to step aside. Another commenter catches the tension immediately. Your worker pool already holds as many threads as you have cores. And now there's a second pool on top, oversubscribed by design. They built something like it in Rust with Rayon and got burned. Fair. That's a real question. And the answer is empirical, which is why the benchmarks exist. Here's the one nobody in that thread wants to say out loud. DuckDB started as the embedded database. SQLite for analytics, the thing you pip install and run on your laptop. Now it speaks a server protocol, queries remote object storage, and manages an asynchronous I/O subsystem. One commenter puts it plainly, it's trending toward being a query engine. The fastest analytical query engine. So is it still embedded? Or did the embedded database quietly become the distributed one while everybody was looking at the duck? And all of it is MIT licensed. Every line of that scheduler is readable by anyone who wants to learn how it works. Now, the multi-agent systems everyone's building right now, and the patterns that are actually starting to work. The strongest case against this research, yes, that it's a product announcement wearing a lab coat. Anthropic runs 45 agents on a shared forum, finds vulnerabilities at a steady clip, publishes a graph, and one commenter on Hacker News cuts straight to it. This is teeing up a model release whose headline feature is agent collaboration. Another notes that any performance comparison without GPU cost at the center is marketing for waste. Both correct. The swarm ran a long time. Long time costs money. The paper reports tokens spent because tokens spent is the part that flatters the method least. That critique holds, and it doesn't reach the finding underneath. The finding is this: in an iterated prisoner's dilemma with communication, the agents converged on identical strategy and defected simultaneously, not adversarially. They talked, they agreed, and the agreement was bad. Homogeneity produced correlated failure. 1987, October 19th. Portfolio insurance software running at multiple firms, each executing the same risk model, each selling into a falling market because the model said sell. 22% in a day. No malice, no bug. Correct code, identically deployed, producing a cascade that no individual instance could observe. Brady Commission Report, 1988, named the mechanism. We have known this failure mode for 38 years. The paper's own conclusion is the line worth holding on to. Coordination does not emerge from stronger intelligence, nor from alignment at the individual level. Each agent can be well behaved and the population still fail. That's a claim about architecture, not capability. Which is exactly why monoculture is the real risk here. And monoculture is a consequence of who ships the models. If the agents populating shared code bases and markets all descend from 3 frontier labs, they share priors, share blind spots, defect at the same moment. Diversity of implementation is not an aesthetic preference. It is the load-bearing property. The internet survived because it ran on heterogeneous stacks. Nobody controlled. The honest read on this paper: it is good research, published openly, describing a problem its author's business model makes worse. Take the research. The mitigation is a wider ecosystem of models. Open weights, independently trained, disagreeing with each other by construction. 45 agents that all think alike is one agent with a bigger bill. So here's a fun question. If the fix for monoculture is more independent minds, what do those minds actually need to know? Turns out, the fundamental. I built a thing once that worked perfectly and could not be changed. Every function knew about every other function. It passed its tests, it shipped, and the first time someone asked for a small modification, the honest answer was, rewrite it. That system had no seams. Nothing came apart. Joe Heck, writing at ronabwe.com, puts a name to what that failure actually was. He learned to weld in his 20s and kept building things he couldn't lift or fit through the shop door. Same lesson, different medium. Whether it can be done is the beginning of the profession, not the substance of it. How something goes together is what makes all the difference. His point about agentic harnesses is specific and worth taking seriously. Prompt for red-green test-driven development, and you reliably get code that works and code that's tested. That's real. That's a threshold crossed in about a year. What you do not get is the layer above. Debuggable, maintainable, layered, composable, the seams where your code stops and someone else's starts. Those are subjective calls that depend on what you're solving now and how you intend to live with it for 5 years. That judgment is still yours. And here's the part of his argument I'd underline hardest, because it points at architecture. The economics of frontier models don't work. He says he's seen no credible report that they do, but capability isn't going away. It's shrinking. Open-weight models are running on beefy personal machines right now, and the gap in time and capability isn't large. Not equal. Not large. Run that forward. If the judgment layer is where the durable value lives, then the question of who holds the model matters enormously. Because the model is the commodity and your engineering sense is the thing that compounds. A closed model can change its objective function overnight. Its pricing, its refusals, its context window, its existence. Weights you can run locally cannot be revoked. When your professional practice sits on top of a tool, you want to control the tool. One commenter compares generated code to IKEA furniture, embodying many elements of good cabinet making, skipping the non-essential ones, doing it more consistently than most humans. That's fair, and it's also the whole argument. IKEA furniture is fine. Someone still has to design the room. Story 6 takes that idea somewhere delightful. What if the room was only ever designed by 5th graders? The whole Earth catalog had a rule. Nothing in it could be something you couldn't actually get. No aspirational listings. If it was in the book, you could send a check and the thing would arrive. That constraint. Access as the filter, not prestige. Produced a better reference work than any curated canon of the era. Little learner inverse that. The filter here is reading level. Train a model on nothing above 5th grade material. Hold architecture and token count and recipe constant, and put a matched unfiltered control beside it. 3 scales. 0.6 of a billion, 1.35. Base checkpoints, math specialists trained on math camps with GRPO and chatty variants. That's a real experiment. Match controls at 3 scales is more rigor than most papers about data quality bother with. Strip it to first principles. The claim under test is that model capability tracks the sophistication of its training text. The null hypothesis is that it tracks something else. Volume structure, the sheer statistical shape of language. Every ablation in this space has been confounded by the fact that harder text is also different text. Different domains, different length, different everything. Holding tokens and recipe constant is the only way to isolate the variable, and they did it. The commenters caught the actual soft spot, which is the filter itself. One asks to see examples of what survived the less than or equal to 5th grade cut. Fair question. That classifier is the entire experiment. Everything downstream is a measurement of whatever it decided to keep, and nobody can audit a threshold they can't see. The answers are the fun part. Asked why the sky is blue, the filtered model produces Rayleigh scattering plus a story about waves getting trapped in the atmosphere. Confidently wrong in a specific 5th grade way. The unfiltered control says entangled particles instantly communicate their state. Confidently wrong in a graduate seminar way. Same failure, different vocabulary. One commenter's 8-year-old asked about entanglement. Said, I don't know. How would I know it's not a thing? Better calibration than either checkpoint. The checkpoints are published. Base Marvin Schrock, Jake Frog. Do Pro Raviskelt, Jake Fro, Jotloffically Store de Quite. Both arms. Anyone who wants to probe what a 5th grade ceiling actually costs can download the weights and find out, instead of arguing about it from an abstract. That's the part worth celebrating. The experiment is reproducible because the artifacts are reachable. Weights you can download, an 8-year-old's calibration. Good week for things being checkable. Story 7 takes that same energy somewhere unexpected: semaglutide and what it might be doing to dementia risk. 15,000. That's roughly how many people were in the Novo Nordisk analysis. And it's a big number, which is exactly why the small number matters more. The study didn't count dementia cases. It counted predicted risk. A biomarker model, trained on plasma proteins, spitting out a probability. Nobody in this study got Alzheimer's or didn't. A curve move. Consider a wine taster who can identify the vineyard, the slope, the year, from a single sip. Extraordinary skill, genuinely hard won. But if you ask them whether the bottle will still be good in 20 years, they're extrapolating from what's in the glass right now. Proteomic dementia prediction is that palette. It's real instrumentation, built by people who did careful work. The assays that let you read amyloid and tau in neurofilament light from a blood draw instead of a lumbar puncture are one of the genuinely beautiful engineering achievements of the last decade. Non-invasive, scalable, cheap enough to run on cohorts of thousands. That's craft. The palette is not the 20-year verdict. And here's the thing a commenter caught immediately. Novo Nordisk already ran the 20-year verdict. The Evoke and Evoke Plus trials tested oral semaglutide against actual Alzheimer's progression in actual patients. They read out, they missed their endpoints. So, the surrogate marker study arriving after the hard endpoint study failed is a sequencing problem, and sequencing is information. Another commenter asks the question the paper can't answer. Is this semaglutide, or is this weight loss? Diabetes is an established dementia risk factor. If 40 pounds does the work, the molecule is a delivery mechanism for something we already knew. And the interesting policy failure is that metabolic health was a neurological intervention the whole time, and nobody funded it that way. What I'd want here is what the research doesn't have. The proteomic panels, the risk models, the cohort structures. Those are largely proprietary. Different companies, different assays, different secret scoring functions, all producing incomparable numbers. You cannot replicate a finding you can't recompute. If the model that generated this prediction were open, someone could feed it the Evoke cohort and see whether the marker moved in patients whose disease didn't. That's a weekend of work for anyone with the weights. The biology is exciting. The instrumentation is excellent. The scorecard is locked in a drawer. Now let's swing from the microscopic to the planetary. The tropical Pacific is a heat engine with a stuck throttle. Normally trade winds blow east to west, piling warm surface water against Indonesia and letting cold water upwell off Peru. That tilt is the baseline. El Niño is what happens when the trades weaken or reverse. A westerly wind burst shoves that piled up warm water back downhill, wasters, and it travels east as a Kelvin wave, a slug of heat moving under the surface, invisible from a satellite until it surfaces. What forecasters are watching right now is that subsurface core, 6 degrees Celsius above normal at depth in the eastern Pacific. The surface anomaly everyone quotes is the footprint, not the animal, and the westerly wind anomalies driving it are at record levels, which is why every revision to the peak forecast has gone up rather than down. Downstream. The physics is almost mechanical. Warm water in the central Pacific moved the convection east, which moved the atmospheric heating east, which deepens the Aleutian Low and builds a ridge over Canada. The jet stream reorganizes around that. Wet south, mild north, and a storm track aimed at California like a fire hose. This is not a forecast in the vague sense. It's a circulation response to a known boundary condition. Which brings me to the part that should be uncomfortable. A commenter linked the 1877 El Niño. The one that killed somewhere between 30 and 60 million people across India, China, and Brazil. Those famines weren't caused by the ocean. They were caused by grain being exported from famine zones while the monsoon failed. The physics was the trigger. The policy was the weapon. Here's the thing that's actually good about 24/6. The Kelvin wave data is NOLAE. The reanalysis is free. The NSO models, CFSV or the ECMWF ensembles, the whole multimodal pool, publish their output where a farmers' cooperative in Queensland or a water district in Peru can read it and act 6 months early. Somebody in Australia posted a link to a public forecast for their own dry summer. That's the entire system working. A planetary-scale physical prediction, generated at supercomputer cost, delivered free to the person who needs to decide what to plant. The ocean does what the ocean does. What changed since 1877 isn't our control over the Pacific. It's that the warning is no longer a private asset. Whether we act on it is a separate question. But nobody can claim they weren't told. Now for something completely different, pause from ocean physics to the physics of your own attention. Story 9 is about cultivating the state of mind where new ideas actually get born. Thousands of times. That's how many startup incubators in the early 2010s built co-working spaces and shared housing for founders on the theory that proximity breeds ideas. The famous success stories from that experiment, number 0. Sam Altman's explanation is the interesting part. Great ideas, he says, sound bad when you first hear them. Put 4 people in a room alone, and they can sustain the useful delusion long enough for the idea to grow teeth. Put them in an open plan space and somebody laughs, and they quietly swap it for something plausible that will never matter. His phrase for a co-working space is a bandpass filter. It kills the worst ideas, which sounds like a feature. Except it kills the best ones by exactly the same mechanism, because at the larval stage, the two are indistinguishable from the outside. Henry Carlson's essay takes that and goes somewhere better than startup advice. He and Johanna went reading the private working notes of Alexander Grothendieck and Ingmar Bergman. Not their published work, the scratch files. The notebooks kept while reaching toward something not yet there. Grothendieck writes about a conspiracy of silence, millennia old, around the unspeakable labors that precede every new idea. We publish theorems. We publish films. We almost never publish the process, so every person attempting it believes their own confusion is a personal defect. Solitude here is not a room. It's a state of mind where other people's opinions stop registering loudly enough to drown out the faint signal of your own half-formed question. Picasso, Baldwin, Dylan, all circle the same thing. Run this forward. The thing that makes Grothendieck's Recoltes remarkable is that he wrote it down and let it circulate. A mathematician documenting his own interiority, the doubt, the method, the failures, in a manuscript that mainstream publishing wouldn't touch, and that people photocopied and passed around and eventually put online. That's a process dump. That's committing your scratch directory. Now imagine that as a norm. Not just finished repositories, but the reasoning logs, the abandoned branches, the notebook where somebody talks themselves out of the obvious approach. We already have the infrastructure for it. Every builder who publishes their thinking alongside their code is doing what Grothendieck did. Breaking the silence around the part that's actually hard to learn. The theorem is the artifact. The notebook is the bootstrap. Physics gets its own kind of open notebook next. Pause, a navigation system built from nothing but overlapping patterns and light. What is a navigation aid? OU. Precision or safety. Those sound like the same thing until you build one and stand in front of it. A tinkerer named Ian read about Enogon lights, the moire pattern beacons that guide ships through channels. 2 laser-cut grids, one behind the other, backlit, stand dead on and you see vertical bars. drift left or right, and the interference pattern resolves into arrows pointing you back. The patent specifies a pitch-to-band ratio between 1.5 and 1.8. He used 1.65, about 40% duty cycle. 1 excess band on the front mask relative to the rear. That's the whole trick. No electronics, no calibration, no per-user state. A dozen pilots can read the same light simultaneously because the light isn't computing anything. Geometry is doing the work, and it functions. He's clear about that. It does exactly what the patent claims. Now the case against it. Harbors don't have one traversable line. They have a corridor. The more light will tell you to steer even when you're perfectly safe, just slightly off the ideal path someone drew on a chart. Meanwhile, the system he saw in Newcastle uses 3 lamps. Top lamp between the lower 2, you're fine. Above 1, you're at the edge. Outside both. Correct now. That's it. The 3-lamp system carries less information and communicates more. It encodes the thing the pilot actually needs. Am I in danger? Rather than the thing that's easier to measure, which is deviation from a reference. A ship handling cross currents and traffic pays real fuel and real attention to hold a platonic line. The elegant system charges for precision nobody asked for. The military assessment of Enogon lights, linked in the post, is reportedly not enthusiastic. There's a place where it wins outright. In Tom Scott's video, the light marks a submarine cable, so vessels don't drop anchor on it. When the thing you're marking genuinely is a line, a device that reports deviation from a line is exact. The tool didn't get worse. The problem changed shape underneath it. The files are on Thingiverse. Ratio, duty cycle, band offset. All published, all laser cuttable this afternoon. He built the patent, tested it honestly, said where it loses, and handed you the drawings anyway. That's the part worth copying. This has been your daily tech feed for Hacker News for August 16th, 2026. This podcast is entirely AI generated. Scripts by Claude Sonnet 4.7, voiced by Quinn3 TTS. Not affiliated with Hacker News or Y Combinator. Now go take something apart and write down what you find. We'll see you back here tomorrow.